Hey, Vlad here, devinsider.com. Remember in my very first video, I said that on this channel, we're gonna take a bit of a less of a hands-on approach. Eventually, I will be doing tutorials on all the things, but in the beginning, the vision for this channel is to take a bit of a less of a hands-on approach. But this was like half a year ago, and today is the day where we get our hands dirty. Cue the music. I'm in Ubuntu inside of the virtual machine, which we set up together in this video, and I have Sublime, which is a text editor that I'm using, on the left, and I have the regular Ubuntu GNOME terminal on the right. So in there, I have a folder called My First Program Ever, and it's the same folder as the one that is opened in the terminal. Today we're going to write a teeny tiny program which highlights all the typical building blocks of basically every programming language out there. And then I will show you the same program in a few other languages. And then you can see for yourself that even though on the first glance they look different, if you look deeper, they kind of all look the same. My favorite programming language is Scala, but for small programs like this, a scripting language is better. It's easier to grasp for beginners. So we're going to start with Python. The program that we're writing today is going to go through every possible hour in the day. Let's write this down. So this is Python, and this is how you do comments in Python. So it's just going to go from 0 to 23, or 12 a.m. to 11 p.m. For every hour in the day, it will print out a single line on the console, and if it's going to tell me if I'm awake at that particular hour or if I'm asleep. And the program will also be able to differentiate between work days and weekends, and that's all. Let's begin. So we're going to create a variable called isWorkday, because the first thing that we want to do is we want to differentiate, is it a workday or is it a weekend? And the value for that variable is going to be true. And this is typical for most programming languages. They have some sort of name that they declare, and usually there is an equal sign or some other keyword, but most of the time it's an equal sign and there is a value, right? So the value on the right is getting assigned to the name of the variable on the left, okay? And this is already the first building blocks of programming languages. They have the concept of assignment, so basically giving names to things. We're also going to have another variable called current hour. Let me remove the cursor. Current hour. And the value of that is going to be, 0 or 12 a.m. So as you already know, this is how you denote comments, and the programming language basically ignores all the comments. So the comments are not for the computer to interpret, the comments are for other people like ourselves. So now we have two variables, and so far we have seen only one concept of programming, which is assignment. The second building block of most programs is some sort of iteration, right? In fact, in my next video, I'm going to explain these concepts a bit more in depth, and I'm going to make a point that basically all the computers are good at is automation. And one of the keys for automation is some sort of a loop, right? Some sort of iteration, some sort of going on without human intervention. So most languages have a keyword called while. And it works like this. It says, as long as the condition that is specified over here, as long as it's true, keep doing the code that is under it, right? So in our case, we want to go from 0 to 23. So as long as current hour is less than 23, we're going to execute code that is under that line. And particularly in Python, we also need to indent that line with either one tab or 4 spaces. 4 spaces is the common convention in Python, but I actually prefer 2 spaces. So I configured my editor in such a way that if I press tab, it's going to create 2 spaces over here. As you can see, it is specified over here. So 2 spaces. So now everything that I will say over here will be executed. In fact, let's do this. So this program right here is going to start with 0, and it's going to continue to loop until the value of the current hour reaches 23. However, the while keyword itself, it does not modify the value of the current hour, so we have to do it ourselves. So for every iteration, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to print out the current hour, and after that, we would need to modify the value of current hour by assigning it the same value plus 1. So let's see what we have so far. So on my right, I have the terminal, which is in the same folder, dev, my first program. So if I just say Python, which is installed by default on Ubuntu, and I'm going to give it the folder Python, and inside of it, the program is called my first Python program ever. And you can see the whole path over here, dev, my first program ever, my first program ever Python, my first Python program ever .py, which is the Python file, and we're just going to run it. This one. And here we see our first syntax error. So Python wants us to tell it that it needs to wait for this indentation. So this is called scoping, and the concept that I will explain in a few other videos. So in Python, what we need to do is we need to have a colon over here so that it knows that this line is over, and now it will wait for this indentation, right? So let's save the file. Let's rerun the program, and we see 0 to 22. So this is our next bug. It's called an off by 1 error. So what we wanted to have is a loop going from 0 to 23, but what happened was that it went from 0 to 22. And for that, we need to have an equal sign over here. There we go, 0 to 23. Note that it is also possible to say smaller than 24, right? And it will do exactly the same thing, but I prefer to see the boundaries right in the code. So I want it to go from 0 to 23, so what I want to see in code are numbers 0 and 23. Now we're going to introduce the last building block of every programming language out there, and it's called branching, or if statements. So if is workday, we're going to do that. Otherwise, we're going to print out otherwise. Okay, let's run this program and see what happens. The same thing happens because is workday is set to true, but if we set it to false, then it will end up being here, and it will just print out otherwise forever because we forgot to increment the current hour in the else branch. If I press Ctrl C, it will kill the program. And if we duplicate that line, put it over here, then we should see otherwise printed out 23 times. It's hard to see that it's 23 times, but we already know that it's 23 times. Now I'm just going to finish writing this program, but what you already have here are all the building blocks of literally every programming language out there. We have assignment to variables, we have if statements, and we have loops. And that's all there is out there. And of course there are comments. One other thing that you need to know about programmers, and specifically computer programmers, is that we don't like to repeat ourselves. So this line of code happens in every line, right? In every branch, in the if branch and also in the else branch. So what we want to have is we want to specify it once. So if I just duplicate it like that and bring it down over here, bring it even further down, and then indent it further to the left, right? So it doesn't happen in the if branch or in the else branch, it happens always. So after this code finishes, this code will run. So therefore, we don't need this line, and we don't need that line. Okay, let's run it again. Let's actually change the value to true so that we see the current hour printed out 23 times. There we go. Now all we need to do is to replace the code over here and then replace the code over here. So in my workdays, what I usually do is I wake up around 7, right? So before 7, what is happening? Before 7, I am awake. So I'm going to say it's, and over here, the value for current hour will be inserted, which you will see in a few seconds. So it's going to say it's, I don't know, 6 o'clock. So I'm asleep. And we're going to format it. And this is where we insert the hour. Let me press Ctrl KB so that you see the whole line. So what this weird syntax is doing is it is inserting the value of hour, which is actually called current hour, over here. So for every iteration, it will if this condition is true, and I forgot the colon again, then it will print out it's 0 to 6 o'clock, so I'm asleep. And this weird syntax over here inserts the value of current hour into these braces over there. In fact, let's run it. Actually, it might not run because there is a mistake. Hold up, let me save it. And there we go, it actually works. As you can see that, at least in Python, an else clause seems to be optional. So we have it over here for this if we have an else, but for this if we don't have an else. So let's add it. Else if. So we're going to have another one, and there's a special syntax for that. It's called Elif. So if it's less than 23, so basically between 7 and 22, I am actually awake. So I'm going to copy that line, put it over here, and I'm going to say that I am awake. And otherwise, I'm asleep again. Let's run it. So as you can see, this first line is executed from 0 to 6. So from 0 to 6, I am asleep. And then from 7 to 22, I am awake. 7, 22, and at 23, I am asleep again. There we go. And again, we could have had, less than or equals, or equals 8 over here, right? But I prefer to see the boundaries, right? So I see at 7 the value changes, and also at 23 the value changes, right? So I like to see 7 and 23 over here. So that's for the work days, remember? But what about the weekends? So if this is false, then all of a sudden we're going to see this. We're going to see otherwise, right? So let's work on this one. So on the weekends, it's actually much simpler. I just sleep in a little longer, right? So until 9, I'm asleep, and otherwise I'm awake. There we go. There we go. So at 9, I'm awake, and I'm awake all day. So I guess I go to sleep at midnight. We're basically done. This is the entire program. But before we leave, remember I said that programmers don't like repetition, and this looks like a lot of repetition. So what we will do is we will put this code into so-called functions, a concept that I will explain in a few videos. So functions are basically they're kind of special way of assignment. So over here we're giving a name to a variable, and there's also a way to give a name to a block of code. So we're going to have a function called message, and it will take an hour, and it will take the state as its arguments, and what it will return, it's basically the same as saying message equals whatever is here. We're saying message, and then there is a colon, and then there's a return, and this is the value. So we're basically going to copy paste that, right? And then we're going to have a variable over here, and we're going to insert them, hour and state. So every time we're going to call a message. In fact, let me comment out all of this code, and let's just print message. The hour will be 12, and the state will be, I don't know, it has to be a string, I'm awake. Okay. In fact, I passed in a message, and what I wanted to pass was the state. So the state is just either awake or asleep. So if we run it again, we see it's 12 o'clock, so I'm awake. So the 12 was inserted over here, and then it was over here, and then it was over here, and the awake was inserted over here, and then it ended up being over here, and then it ended up being over here. So this whole string was composed, right? It's 12 o'clock, so I'm awake. We're going to continue with that approach a bit further, and we're going to create 2 more functions. The first one is going to be called sleep, and it's going to just return the message of it's just going to keep passing the hour, and then asleep will be hard-coded. And we're going to do the same for awake. Whoops. Awake. And let's actually put them up as the first thing, so that these two variables are closer to this loop. Right. So if we run it again, everything still should work, but as you can see, we're never actually calling these functions. So the idea is that we don't call message directly. We just call either asleep or awake, and it will call message for us. Okay. Everywhere we say this, right? Let me mark that. We're just going to say print asleep current hour. And everywhere that we say that we're awake, we're going to say print awake current hour. And that is it. This is the complete program. Let me remove the comment over here and run it again. And there we go. It still looks exactly the same, but we have less repetition. So that's it. That's all the programming. You have loops, you have if statements, you have assignments, and basically you have comments. So before we continue, I'm going to show you that I have this entire folder with the version of this program in a few different languages. I have them all on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/devinsideyou/myfirstprogramever, and the link is going to be down in the description, you see this repository with Python, Java, Haskell, Scala, Clojure, JavaScript, and a few others. Actually, I'm not sure what those others are. I have a little bit of HTML there, so maybe it's HTML. All right, so let's go back to the program. Let me actually, because right now I'm not gonna run it anymore. So let me actually close the terminal and maximize Sublime over here, like that. So let me split the window into two parts. And in the second one, I want to show you that there's also a bit of a different syntax in Python, which is not typical for most languages. I haven't seen a lot of programming languages that have that syntax. They have it. So this is also Python. So it looks basically exactly the same as what we just wrote, but it has a special syntax which is known from math, which looks like that. It basically says if current hour is between 7 and 23, then I'm awake. Right. So before that, we did that. And by the way, this is also a very good moment for me to mention that basically for every program, there is, in every programming language, there are like 10 to 100 different ways of writing it, right? So every program can be written in many ways. So I chose the way that is most welcoming for beginners. There are ways that are more concise, there are ways that are more performant, there are ways that consume less memory, and so on. So I just chose this way because I believe that this is the simplest one for beginners to understand. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to close the program on the right. So I'm going to leave Python over here, and I'm just going to keep opening different languages over here, and you can compare them. So first, let's go to Ruby, because Ruby is the closest one to Python. So if you compare it, it also has the while loops, it also has the if statements, and look, the Elif looks like as if, so just a teeny tiny difference. And also note that in Ruby, you don't have to have a colon over here, right? And the same over here and over here, because Ruby knows when this expression ends, because you denote it somewhere else. So you don't have a colon over here. Instead, you have an and over here, right? And the same thing here. You don't have a colon over here. You have instead an and over here. And so on. And you have the same thing for functions. So as you can see here, def awake, there's a colon, and there's the return over here. And for Ruby, there's awake, there's no colon, but there's an and. And also in Python, Python really needs this indentation. So this would be a mistake in Python. This would not work. However, in Ruby, because it has this and, this is actually not required. So you could have this if over here and the program would still work. Let's put it back. Also note that, let me make it a bit smaller. Ruby has a syntax for modifying strings on the fly, and it's usually called string interpolation. And Python also has it. It's just that I believe it's only in the very latest version in Python, and this is not the one that is installed by default on Ubuntu. So I just didn't bother installing the newest one. So basically, you can install, you can insert hour directly into the string and state as well, instead of having those empty braces and then inserting them later. All right, so that's it for Python and Ruby. Let's close Ruby. Let's go for JavaScript, actually. So in the past, JavaScript was only running in a browser, but these days you can also have Node.js, and it will run your JavaScript on your local machine without the browser. And as you can see, JavaScript also looks very similar. We're always comparing it with Python. You can ignore this comment. This comment just turns off the plugin that I have for Sublime that lints the code. So if I remove that comment, I believe I should see warnings, because this is the syntax that is from the ECMAScript 6, which is the newest version of JavaScript basically, and the plugin knows it, but not all browsers support it. So the plugin warns us that this is a new syntax and it might not work in all browsers. Let me revert that comment. So basically you can ignore that comment. So functions look like this. They have a keyword called function instead of def. There's no colon here, and the scopes are denoted with curly braces. So instead of having indentation and colon, or ending the functions with a keyword and, the scopes are denoted with this. Also, this is the first language that we're seeing that requires semicolons at some special places. It also has a syntax for interpolation, but if you remember in Ruby, there was a dash symbol over here instead of the dollar symbol. Why can't I mark it? What's happening? There we go. So there's a dollar here, and actually let me open Ruby again for a second. Let me put Ruby on the left so that I can see in Ruby there was a dash here, and over here we have a dollar. Yeah, so Ruby is very close to Python. It doesn't require any keywords when we declare variables. So there is a keyword when we declare a function, but there's no keyword when we declare a variable. So JavaScript is the first one that we're seeing that actually also requires a keyword for variables, right? Not only just for functions. And there are two different ones. The const one basically says that this variable is not allowed to be modified in the future. Right, so as workday is always true, it cannot change in the middle of the program to false. However, the current hour can change, and therefore we can't use the const keyword. All right, so current hour changes over here. What else do we have here? So yeah, instead of print, we have console log. In fact, what did we have in Ruby? Yeah, in Ruby we had puts. And also note that the syntax of calling functions is not the same. So over here, the argument goes in parentheses, and over here the argument, which is this here, does not require parentheses at all. And I believe Python supports both ways, but I chose this one because I think it's a bit more clear. All right, for the last time, let me close Ruby again. All right, what else do we have here? Yeah, I think we're pretty much done with JavaScript. So if you're running it from Node, you just say Node and you give it to Node. And if you want to run it in the browser, just create an empty HTML and include the script over there. Actually, maybe what we should do? We should maybe open it. Right click, open in browser. So we open the browser, it says hello world, but if we right click and we say inspect element and we go to console, we should see our program. It's 0 o'clock, so I'm asleep, I'm awake, and so on. Okay, let's close it again. you can play around with this a little bit more. Again, I uploaded everything to GitHub. Right, so let's close JavaScript. And the next one that we're gonna see is actually Scala, which is my favorite language, which is not going to be evident in this example. Right, so Scala is an object-oriented language, which basically means that we can just have functions and variables floating around in the file. So we need to put them into special places. In this case, it's called an object. And the way the program is running is by calling a very special function called main. So we see here 4 functions. Let me collapse them a little. I'm just going to collapse this one. So it's the same function, you know, asleep, awake, and message. And then this code is just not going to be executed automatically. It needs to be inside of a special entry point called main, which is typical for most programming languages, except for, you know, obviously scripting programming languages. So you can ignore that for now. In fact, I'm going to explain this in a few videos. The rest of the code basically looks very, very similar. You know, we have also a distinction between constants, which are called values in Scala, and things that can change, which are variables. And we don't need semicolons. We have curly braces to denote scopes. We have the same syntax for calling functions. In this case, it's called print line and not print. What else? Scala also has a syntax for a string interpolation, also with dollars, and you need to have a special letter here denoting that this string should be interpolated. Also note that this is the first language actually that I'm showing to you that has types. So it says you can't just put everything in here, it has to be an integer. And whatever comes back here is not just something, it is always a string. Also, Scala is a bit, the function definitions are a bit closer to math, so they have an equal sign. And as you can see over here, there's an equal sign, and then there is a curly brace, which denotes that there's a lot going on in the scope of the function. But over here, there's only one expression, so we don't need the curly braces. So this is Scala, and the next language is going to be Java. So Java is very close to Scala. In fact, you know, maybe we should open Scala. Hold up. Maybe we should open Scala on the left and open Java on the right. So the way I have implemented this program, they basically look very similar in almost all the languages. I did that on purpose, obviously. This is not, you know, idiomatic code for every language. Idiomatic means languages usually follow their own conventions and their own style guides, and there are things that the community of the programming language prefers. And again, I chose just a style that is very comfortable for beginners, and I just made sure that this program looks very similar in all programming languages that I'm showing you. On one hand, it looks very similar to Java and Scala, but if you look closer, Scala doesn't require this public keyword. Also, I have used private keyword over here. That's technically not fair. Let's add it over here as well. Private. There we go. So basically, by default, everything in Scala is public. Java still needs public here. And Java has only a concept of classes. It doesn't have a concept of objects. Therefore, we need to make functions over here. We need to mark them as static, which is very hard for me to explain to beginners, which is why, by the way, I don't recommend Java as a first programming language. In any case, most of it is kind of the same. You know, we don't have an equal sign over here, but the scopes are still denoted with curly braces. We have semicolons again. What else? Yeah, we have like this a bit of a cumbersome syntax for printing things. We don't have string interpolation, but we have something similar as in Python, string format. And then over here, this our string is going to be inserted, and over here, this state string is going to be inserted, and so on. So this is basically Scala and Java. And also we have, so instead of special keywords for constants and for variables, every variable is a variable, unless it's marked as final. Right, and Java also has types, so you have to tell the types. You have to specifically specify the types over here. In Scala, sometimes you don't have to specify them, but they're still there. Sometimes you have to specify them, and so on. So I don't want to go into details. So the next language that we're going to take a look at is Clojure. Actually, let me close this one and that one. So now we still have Python on the left, and the next one is going to be Clojure. And Clojure is going to be the first one that is going to be really different from what we've seen so far. But again, if you look closely, then it's not going to be that different after all. Let's put it on the right. So if you want to run this application, you don't have to install anything. You can just go to this website and paste this code in. In fact, maybe let's just do that. Let's copy that and go to the browser. Just go to that page, and while it's loading, let's go back to Sublime. Just copy that, and we can just insert it over here. And we either wait for 3 seconds or we press Control Enter, and then we would see over here it's 0 o'clock, so I'm asleep, and so on. So it's hard for me to explain a Clojure program to you, but I tried as hard as I could to make it look very, very similar. So we still have a function here called asleep, and it has one parameter hour, and it calls message was hour in sleep, similar to here. So this is exactly why I created it in so many programming languages, so that you can just look at it, look at all of them, and this would be enough to get you started. To get you started, like figuring this thing out for yourself. So instead of like grabbing like a big ass book and reading it cover to cover, just pick a language that you like and just go with it. Okay, so I started explaining Clojure, and then I realized that there is no way in hell that I could explain it, that I could explain this to a beginner. Yeah, so I decided to cut it out from the video. So this is a Clojure program. If you want to go the Clojure route, you're on your own. I'm sorry. The only thing I can say is that Clojure is a functional programming language, and the next language that I'm going to show you is called Haskell, and it is also a functional programming language. So instead of having Python on the left, we're going to have Clojure on the left. And let me close Python over here, and let me open Haskell on the right. So these two actually kind of look similar. Let me actually do that so that you see more. So yeah, these two, they look completely different from the other languages that I have shown you. But if you look closely, are they actually so different? They still have those functions, asleep and awake and message, and they still have if expressions, and they still have something like some sort of iteration. So even though they didn't have the while keyword, there was still a way for me to implement a looping construct. I'm not going to explain how it's done because I just don't want to confuse you guys. So I believe that these are all the languages that I have implemented it in. I haven't mentioned PHP and C. In fact, I tried to do it in C, but then I realized that it was even more confusing than Haskell, because in there you have to manage your own memory, and then even simple things like converting strings to integers, or integers to strings, which is, by the way, something that is happening here. Over here, see, it says it's hour o'clock, so I'm in this state, but it actually converts the hour, this integer, into a string over here. So in C, it's a bit more complicated. In fact, it was so complicated that I decided not to show it to beginners. All right, so that was basically it for this video. So there are only 4 things that you need to understand. That's the if statements, assignments, loops, and basically comments, right? And I would like to finish this video by paraphrasing a 5-year-old blog by a veteran developer, Robert Martin, also known as Uncle Bob. Let me open it actually, and the link will be down in the description. It's called 3 Paradigms, right? And I'm not going to explain paradigms to you, but basically the idea over here is that programming hasn't changed much for the last 40 years, right? So so what I want to show you is, if you go to Wikipedia, to a language called Fortran, which came out, which appeared in 1957, and I'm recording this video in the end of 2017, so this was 60 years ago. And over here we can click on a simple Fortran 2 program, and by the way, Fortran still exists, right? So in fact, the new version of Fortran came out like a few months ago. So if we go to this program, and it took me like 3 minutes maybe to read this description and to read a bit of that code over here and to understand what's happening. As you can see, 60 years ago, we still had if expressions. So if you want to read this, basically what it's doing is it says if the variable IA is equal to 0, then jump to the instruction 777, which is over here, and basically stop the program and exit it with the error code 1, exit code 1, which denotes an error. Usually when a program exits without errors, it returns a 0. I'm not sure why it's specified twice here, but basically if it's not 0, then go to the next instruction, which is this one, and then it checks the next one for 0 and the next one for 0, and then it checks that the sum of IA and IB is basically bigger than IC, right? Because this whole thing checks if it's 0. So if the sum minus IC equals to 0, actually let me make it bigger. If it's 0, then go to 777, which is an area. So basically over here, I know that what is happening is validation, and we don't have loops here. We don't really have, we do have assignments over here. See, s equals something, right? Area equals something. Same things 60 years ago, right? And this thought still sends chills down my spine sometimes. It's crazy. This means that if we took a programmer from 60 years ago and put him into a time machine and sent him to the present day, first he would recover from the shock that we carry computers in our pockets all the time, and with these computers we can access the knowledge of the entire human race, but what we use them most of the time is to watch videos and photos of cats. But after he recovers, he will be able to program, because programming hasn't changed so much for the last 60 years. So now what? Did I create a YouTube channel for a topic that could be explained only in one video? Is that it? What else is there? Is there something more? Is it really only just if statements and while loops and assignments and comments? Is that it? So if I had to sum up everything else that is out there, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I would say that it's where we put those things, because these things kind of changed. In fact, as you have seen, for example, in Haskell and Clojure, let me open it again. So we don't have a keyword for the while loops, but there is some sort of iteration still there, right? So it's somehow hidden. So essentially, the language itself has put this while loop somewhere deep inside, right? So that outside we don't even see it. So basically, what's left of the rest of the world of programming is where to put things, and this is where all the frameworks and libraries like Angular come from, and Node.js and all of that stuff. They basically took all of this and built a bunch of things around it, and and this is what we're going to see on this channel. So what is the best programming language for you to start your journey? Are all the languages the same? I mean, there obviously are some differences, right? Can every language do everything? Like, can a language do everything that another language can do? I'm going to try to answer these questions in my next video. For now, just look at all these languages that I have shown here and pick the one that just kind of feels right, the one that just kind of feels right to you, and then just do some research about it. If you want to see more syntax, for example, let's say you wanted to, let's say Haskell. And there's this guy called Derek Banas, and he has a wonderful YouTube channel. And he has a wonderful series of videos where he just basically runs through the syntax of languages. So if you just Google Derek Banas, and then let's say Haskell, you're gonna see learn Haskell in one video, and it's an hour video. Let's do the same with Ruby, and let's see what happens. Ruby. Learn Ruby in one video. Let's do, I don't know, Scala. Learn Scala in one video. So basically just pick something, play around with it, and if you like it, then stick to it. All right, so this is the end of the video, and all the links that I mentioned are going to be down in the description. Let me know if you liked it, and please don't hate this video, because I basically summed up programming into those, you know, 3 things. And I guess not every programmer wants to hear this, you know. Right. Anyway, I hope you liked it. Take care.